The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Marfa, Texas, and Daisy Verne knew in that instant her life would never be the same. She stood frozen in the doorway of the general store, the fabric of her borrowed dress suddenly feeling like chains around her body. The man who had just fallen in the dirt outside the saloon across the street was her employer. The man whose trust she had just betrayed in the worst possible way. Her hands trembled as she clutched the small leather pouch hidden beneath her shawl, the pouch containing nearly $200 she had stolen from his safe just 20 minutes earlier. The irony was not lost on her that someone else had just put a bullet in him before she could even begin to run. The year was 1883, and Marfa was still finding its footing as a railroad town in the harsh West Texas desert. Daisy had arrived 3 months earlier with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate need to disappear from her past in San Antonio. She had lied about her experience, lied about her references, and somehow convinced Thomas Whitley to hire her as a bookkeeper for his freight company. He had been kind to her, patient when she made mistakes, and had even advanced her wages when she claimed her sick mother needed medicine. There was no sick mother. There was only debt, the kind that came with owing money to men who did not forgive or forget. Now, Thomas lay dead in the street, and the money she had stolen felt like hot coals burning through the fabric against her skin. People were running toward the fallen man, shouting for the doctor, but Daisy could not move. Her breath came in short, painful gasps as the reality of what she had done crashed over her like a wave. She had stolen from a good man, a decent man, and now he would never know she had planned to confess. Never know that her conscience had been eating her alive since the moment she cracked open his safe. "Miss Verne!" The voice came from behind her, low and steady. "You might want to step inside before you draw attention to yourself." She spun around to find Xander Ingram standing in the shadows of the store's interior. He was one of Thomas Whitley's ranch hands, a cowboy who came into town every few weeks for supplies. She had seen him perhaps a dozen times, had exchanged polite greetings, but had never really looked at him. Now she found herself staring into eyes the color of storm clouds, set in a face weathered by sun and wind. He was tall, broad-shouldered, probably around 25 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. "I did not do that," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I did not shoot him." "I know," Xander said quietly. "I saw Jimmy Parsons do it. Argument over a card game." He glanced past her toward the commotion in the street. "But you look guilty as sin about something, and standing there shaking is going to make folks wonder why." Daisy forced herself to step back into the store, her legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. She was 22 years old, alone in a harsh land, and now the one person who had shown her any kindness was dead. The storekeeper had gone outside to join the crowd, leaving them alone among the barrels of flour and bolts of fabric. "I need to leave town," she said, more to herself than to him. "Running generally makes a person look guilty of something," Xander observed. He leaned against the counter, his expression unreadable. "Though I suppose that is your business." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw something in his face that made her throat tighten. It was not suspicion or judgment, but rather a kind of weary understanding, as if he knew what it was like to carry secrets that weighed on the soul. Before she could stop herself, words were spilling out of her mouth. "I stole from him." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Before he was shot, I stole money from his safe. I was going to run, and then I heard the gunshot, and now he is dead, and I cannot give it back, and I cannot explain, and I am a terrible person who deserves to hang for what I have done." The confession left her breathless and dizzy. She waited for Xander to call out, to alert the authorities, to look at her with the disgust she deserved. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. "How much?" he asked finally. $200, almost everything he kept in the office safe. Her hands were shaking so badly now that she had to clasp them together. "I owed money to men in San Antonio, dangerous men. My father gambled away everything we had before he died, and they said I had to pay his debts, or they would make me pay another way. I thought if I could just get enough money, I could pay them and start over somewhere far from here. And now? Now I am a thief who stole from a dead man, and there is no absolution for that." Xander pushed away from the counter and moved closer to her. He smelled like leather and horses and the clean scent of desert air. "Thomas Whitley was a good man, but he is gone. Those men in San Antonio, though, they are still a problem if you do not pay them." "I cannot keep this money," Daisy said fiercely, even as tears began to slide down her cheeks. It would be wrong. Wronger than what will happen to you if those men catch up to you? Xander's voice was gentle but firm. Thomas had family, a sister in El Paso who will inherit everything. She is wealthy in her own right, married to a banker. $200 will not make or break her, but it might save your life. How can you stand there and tell me it is acceptable to steal from a dead man? Daisy demanded, anger and shame mixing together in her chest until she could hardly breathe. I am not saying it is acceptable. I am saying it is done. Xander held her gaze steadily. The question now is what happens next. You can turn yourself in, confess to the theft, and likely end up in jail or worse. Or you can use that money for what you intended and try to make something decent of your life afterward. Daisy turned away from him, unable to bear the weight of his gray eyes any longer. Through the store window, she could see men carrying Thomas Whitley's body toward the undertaker's office. The sight made her stomach turn. I cannot look at myself. I cannot imagine ever forgiving myself for this. Then do not ask for your own forgiveness, Xander said quietly. Ask for his. She looked back at him, confused. He is dead. And you believe in a God who hears prayers, do you not? Xander gestured toward the small cross she wore around her neck, a gift from her mother before she died. Then ask Thomas Whitley for forgiveness, make peace with what you have done, and then spend the rest of your life being the kind of person who deserves that forgiveness. The simplicity of his words cut through her panic like a knife. Daisy found herself nodding slowly, even as tears continued to stream down her face. I do not know if I can. That is something you will have to figure out. Xander moved toward the door, then paused. I am heading back to the ranch tomorrow to collect my things. Thomas owed me 2 months' wages, and I expect his sister will settle accounts when she arrives. After that, I was planning to head north toward New Mexico territory. A friend has land near Lincoln County that needs working. Daisy stared at him, trying to understand what he was offering. Why are you telling me this? Because traveling alone in this territory is dangerous for anyone, especially a woman. And because I think you are not a bad person, Miss Verne, just a desperate one who made a bad choice. He met her eyes one more time. If you are still in town tomorrow morning and want to head north, you are welcome to ride along. No questions asked, no judgment given. Just 2 people trying to start over. Before she could respond, he was gone, stepping out into the dusty street and disappearing into the crowd of townspeople still gathered around the saloon. Daisy sank onto a wooden crate, her legs finally giving out entirely. The leather pouch felt impossibly heavy beneath her shawl, and she wanted nothing more than to throw it away, to undo the last hour of her life, to go back and make different choices. But that was not possible. All she could do now was decide what came next. That night, Daisy lay in her small rented room above the boarding house and stared at the ceiling. The $200 sat on the table beside her bed, the bills neatly stacked and mocking her with their presence. She had written a letter to Thomas Whitley's sister, explaining what she had done and promising to repay every cent with interest as soon as she was able. The letter remained unsealed on the table, and she was not sure she had the courage to send it. Instead, she found herself thinking about Xander Ingram and his offer. She knew almost nothing about him except that he worked hard, spoke little, and apparently had the capacity to show mercy to a foolish woman who did not deserve it. The idea of traveling with him felt both terrifying and strangely right, as if fate had intervened at the exact moment she needed it most. She thought about the men in San Antonio, men with cold eyes and cruel smiles, who had cornered her in the alley behind her father's house and told her exactly what they expected. They had given her 6 months to pay, and 5 of those months had already passed. If she stayed in Marfa, they would find her eventually. If she ran without paying them, they would hunt her down. The only option that gave her any chance at survival was to pay the debt and disappear so completely that they could never find her again. As dawn broke over the West Texas desert, Daisy made her decision. She packed her few belongings into a worn carpet bag, tucked the money securely into a hidden pocket she had sewn into her skirt, and sealed the letter to Thomas Whitley's sister. She would mail it from the next town, wherever that might be. It was not enough, would never be enough to make up for what she had done, but it was a start. Xander was waiting at the edge of town, with 2 horses and a pack mule loaded with supplies. He nodded when he saw her approaching, his expression carefully neutral. You came. I did not think I had much choice, Daisy admitted. She looked at the horses with some trepidation. I should tell you that I am not an experienced rider. Then you will learn. Xander helped her mount the smaller of the two horses, a gentle mare with kind eyes. We will take it slow at first. The desert is not forgiving to those who rush. They rode out of Marfa as the sun climbed higher in the cloudless sky, painting the landscape in shades of gold and red. Daisy looked back only once, watching the small town disappear behind them, and felt something in her chest loosen slightly. She was still a thief, still carrying guilt that threatened to crush her, but for the first time in months, she felt like she might be able to breathe again. The first few days of travel were difficult. Daisy was not accustomed to spending hours in the saddle, and her body ached in places she had not known could ache. Xander proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to sit properly, how to guide her horse with gentle pressure rather than force, and how to read the land for water and shelter. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were thoughtful and kind. They traveled north through harsh terrain, following old trails that wound through rocky canyons and across vast stretches of empty desert. At night, they made camp under stars so bright and numerous that Daisy sometimes felt dizzy looking up at them. Xander always made sure she had enough to eat, that her bedroll was positioned away from the wind, and that the fire was built up enough to keep away the cold that descended once the sun set. It was on the fourth night, as they sat by the fire eating beans and hardtack, that Xander finally asked about her past. You said your father gambled away everything you had. What about your mother? Daisy stared into the flames, memories washing over her like waves. She died when I was 16. Fever took her in less than a week. After that, it was just my father and me, and he was never the same. He started gambling more, drinking more, until there was nothing left. He died 2 years ago, and that is when the men came to collect his debts. And you felt responsible for paying them. He was my father. Daisy's voice was soft but firm. His debts became mine when he died. That is how these things work. Xander was quiet for a moment, poking at the fire with a stick. My father was a drunk too. Beat my mother until she stopped feeling anything at all. I left home when I was 14, worked ranches and cattle drives, sent money back when I could. Last I heard, he drank himself to death in a saloon in Abilene. I did not go to the funeral. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Daisy looked at him across the fire and saw the pain etched in the lines around his eyes. I am sorry. Do not be. I made peace with it a long time ago. Xander met her gaze. But I understand what it is like to carry someone else's mistakes on your shoulders. And I understand what it is like to feel ashamed of things you cannot control. They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the fire burn down to embers. Daisy felt something shift between them, a connection forged not through words but through shared understanding. For the first time since stealing that money, she did not feel entirely alone. As they continued north, the landscape began to change. The flat desert gave way to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pine. They passed through small settlements where Xander would trade for supplies while Daisy waited with the horses, her face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She was constantly aware of the money hidden in her skirt, constantly afraid that someone would discover her secret and drag her back to face justice. It was in a town called Roswell that they encountered trouble. They had stopped to water the horses at a public trough when 3 men approached them. Daisy recognized the look in their eyes immediately, the predatory assessment that made her skin crawl. These were the kind of men who saw a woman traveling with a single male companion and made assumptions about her character. That is a pretty little thing you have got there, one of them said to Xander, his voice slurred with drink despite the early hour. You willing to share? Xander's expression did not change, but Daisy saw his hand move subtly toward the gun at his hip. The lady is under my protection. I suggest you move along. Protection? The man laughed, a harsh sound that made Daisy's stomach turn. That is a nice word for it. How much does she charge for her protection? The insult hit Daisy like a physical blow. She felt her face flush with shame and anger, felt the old familiar feeling of being reduced to something less than human. Before she could think better of it, she stepped forward. I am not what you think I am. Sure you are not, honey. The man reached out as if to touch her face, and Daisy flinched back instinctively. That was when Xander moved. He did not draw his gun or throw a punch. Instead, he simply stepped between Daisy and the men, his presence suddenly seeming much larger and more dangerous than before. "You have got 3 seconds to walk away before this becomes a problem you cannot fix." Something in his voice must have penetrated the alcohol fog because the men hesitated. The leader looked Xander up and down, calculating his chances, and apparently decided the odds were not in his favor. "No need for trouble. We were just being friendly." "Find someone else to be friendly with," Xander said coldly. The men backed away, muttering insults under their breath, but unwilling to escalate further. Daisy stood frozen, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. When they were gone, she found she could not look at Xander, could not meet his eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You do not need to thank me." Xander's voice was gentle again. "And you do not need to feel ashamed. Those men were fools and drunks, and their opinions are worth less than dirt." But Daisy could not shake the feeling, could not escape the weight of shame that seemed to follow her everywhere. That night at camp, she sat apart from Xander, unable to eat, unable to speak. The encounter had dredged up every ugly thing she had ever thought about herself, every whispered insult and cruel judgment she had endured since her father's death. Xander let her sit in silence for a while, tending to the horses and preparing their meal. But as darkness fell and she still had not moved, he came to sit beside her, not too close, respecting her space, but near enough that she could feel his presence. "When I was younger," he said quietly, "I got into trouble in a town called Fort Worth. I was stupid and angry and looking for a fight, and I found one. Beat a man nearly to death in a saloon brawl. Turned out he was the son of a local rancher, someone important. I had to leave town in the middle of the night with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back." Daisy looked at him, surprised. "You do not seem like the type to pick fights." "I am not anymore. But I was then." Xander stared out at the darkening landscape. "I spent years ashamed of what I had done, convinced I was nothing but a violent drunk just like my father. It took a long time to understand that one bad choice does not define who you are. It is what you do after, how you choose to live your life going forward, that matters." "I stole from a good man who trusted me," Daisy said, her voice breaking. "How do I live with that? How do I ever forgive myself?" "I do not have an easy answer for that," Xander admitted. "But I know that punishing yourself forever will not change what happened. All it will do is waste the second chance you have been given." Daisy turned to look at him fully then, really seeing him for the first time. In the fading light, his face was all sharp angles and shadows, but his eyes were kind. "Why are you helping me? You do not know me. You have no reason to trust me or to care what happens to me." Xander was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because everyone deserves a chance to start over. Because I have been where you are, drowning in shame and thinking I did not deserve to be happy. And because when I look at you, I do not see a thief or a bad person. I see someone who made a desperate choice in an impossible situation and is trying to make it right." The words broke something open inside Daisy, and before she could stop herself, she was crying. Not the silent tears she had shed in the darkness of her room, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere at her core. Xander did not try to touch her or comfort her with empty words. He simply sat beside her and let her cry, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of her emotions. When the tears finally subsided, Daisy felt emptied out but somehow lighter. She wiped her face with her sleeve and took a shaky breath. "I mailed the letter in Roswell, the one to Thomas Whitley's sister. I told her everything and promised to repay the money." "That was brave," Xander said quietly. "It was the least I could do." Daisy looked down at her hands, roughened now from days of travel. "I know it does not make up for what I did, but it is a start. It is more than a start. It is a commitment to being better." Xander stood and held out his hand to help her up. "Come on. You need to eat something, and then you need to rest. We have a long ride ahead of us tomorrow." Daisy took his hand, feeling the strength and warmth of his calloused fingers wrapped around hers. As he pulled her to her feet, their faces were suddenly very close, and she found herself looking into those storm-gray eyes again. For a moment, neither of them moved, and Daisy felt something shift in the air between them, something electric and terrifying and wonderful all at once. Then Xander stepped back, releasing her hand, and the moment passed. But Daisy could still feel the warmth of his touch, could still see the softness in his expression, and she knew with absolute certainty that something was changing between them. They reached Lincoln County 3 weeks after leaving Marfa, and Daisy barely recognized herself. Her skin was tanned from days in the sun, her hands were rough from work, and her body was strong from hours in the saddle. More importantly, something had shifted inside her. The crushing weight of shame was still there, but it no longer threatened to drown her. She had begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could learn to forgive herself. Xander's friend, a rancher named Samuel Hutchins, welcomed them with open arms. He was a weather-beaten man in his 50s with laugh lines around his eyes and a quick smile. His ranch was small but well-maintained, with a sturdy house, a barn, and several outbuildings scattered across rolling grassland. "I have got more work than I can handle alone," Samuel explained as he showed them around. "The previous hand quit last month to try his luck at gold prospecting. Fool's errand if you ask me, but young men rarely listen to reason. I can offer you room and board plus $30 a month, Xander. And Miss Verne, if you are looking for work, my wife could use help with the house and the kitchen. She has been poorly this year, and the work has gotten to be too much for her." Daisy met Martha Hutchins that evening and liked her immediately. She was a small woman with silver-streaked hair and gentle eyes, who moved slowly but spoke with warmth and humor. When Daisy explained that she had some experience with bookkeeping, Martha's face lit up. "Oh, that would be wonderful. Samuel is terrible with numbers, and I simply do not have the energy anymore. If you could help manage the accounts in the household, I would be grateful beyond words." So Daisy found herself settling into a new life on the Hutchins ranch. She kept the books, helped Martha with cooking and cleaning, and slowly began to feel like she might actually have a future. The money from Martha remained hidden in her room, and every night she counted it, calculating how much she needed to pay the men in San Antonio and how much she could set aside to begin repaying Thomas Whitley's sister. Xander worked from sunrise to sunset, mending fences, tending cattle, and doing the 100 other tasks that kept a ranch running. Daisy saw him at meals and sometimes in the evenings when they would all sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. He was always polite, always kind, but he maintained a careful distance that made Daisy ache in ways she did not fully understand. She found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, noticing the way he moved with easy grace despite his size, the way he was gentle with the horses, the way his rare smiles transformed his entire face. She thought about the night he had sat beside her while she cried, the feel of his hand in hers, and the moment when they had stood so close she could have counted his heartbeats. 2 months passed in this fashion, summer giving way to the cooler days of early autumn. Daisy had saved enough money to send her first payment to the men in San Antonio, carefully arranging for it to be delivered through a bank with no return address. She also sent $50 to the address in El Paso, where Thomas Whitley's sister lived, along with a brief note promising more to come. It was on a crisp October morning that everything changed. Daisy had gone to the barn to collect eggs from the chickens when she heard voices raised in argument. She recognized Xander's deep tones, and another voice she did not know, sharp with anger. "I told you the debt was settled," Xander was saying, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Well, Coleman does not think so. Says you still owe him for that horse you took when you left Fort Worth." The stranger's voice was mocking. "He sent me to collect, one way or another." Daisy peered around the barn door and saw Xander facing off with a thin man in dusty travel clothes. The stranger's hand rested on his gun, and every line of his body spoke of violence barely leashed. "I paid for that horse fair and square, and Coleman knows it," Xander said coldly. "This is about something else. This is about him wanting revenge because I embarrassed him in front of his men. Call it whatever you want. The price is $200, or I have instructions to bring you back to Fort Worth for a different kind of settlement." Daisy's heart froze. $200. The exact amount she had stolen from Thomas Whitley. The amount hidden in her room. The amount she had been planning to use for her own debts. Without thinking, she stepped out of the barn. "I have your money." Both men turned to stare at her. Xander's expression was horrified. "Daisy, no! Go back to the house." "I said I have your money." Daisy walked forward, her chin lifted despite the fear coursing through her veins. $200, correct? I can get it for you right now." The stranger looked her up and down with calculating eyes. "And why would you have that kind of money, little lady?" "That is none of your concern. Do you want it or not?" Daisy's voice was steady, though her hands shook. "Daisy, you cannot do this." Xander moved toward her, his face pale. "That money is not for me. It is for your debts, for your future. You gave me a future when you offered me a chance to start over, Daisy said, meeting his eyes. You sat with me when I was drowning in shame and told me I deserved forgiveness. You protected me and asked for nothing in return. Now let me do this for you. I do not want your money. Xander's voice was rough with emotion. I do not want you to sacrifice what you have worked so hard to save. And I do not want to watch you be dragged back to Fort Worth to face whatever vengeance awaits you there. Daisy turned to the stranger. Wait here. I will return with your money in 5 minutes. She hurried to the house before either man could stop her, her heart pounding wildly. In her room, she pulled out the carefully hidden money and counted out $200 with shaking fingers. The remainder, barely $50 after the payments she had already sent, felt impossibly small in her hands. But it was enough. It had to be enough. When she returned to the barn, Xander was standing with his arms crossed and his expression dark as a thunderstorm. The stranger was leaning against the fence, a satisfied look on his face. Daisy thrust the money at him without a word. He counted it carefully, then tipped his hat. Pleasure doing business with you, miss. I will let Coleman know the debt is settled. He mounted his horse and rode off without a backward glance. The moment he was out of sight, Xander turned on her. What did you just do? I helped a friend, Daisy said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. That was not your debt to pay. Xander's voice was harsh, but Daisy could hear the pain beneath the anger. That money was supposed to save you, supposed to give you a fresh start. It was stolen money, Daisy shot back. Blood money that has been eating away at my conscience for months. Using it to help you feels like the first good thing I have done with it. And what about the men in San Antonio? What about repaying Thomas Whitley's sister? Xander stepped closer, his gray eyes boring into hers. You just threw away your safety for a debt that was not even yours to worry about. It became mine the moment I decided I cared about what happened to you, Daisy said, and then stopped, realizing what she had just admitted. The anger drained from Xander's face, replaced by something else entirely. Daisy! I know it was foolish. She looked down at her hands, unable to meet his gaze. I know I should have thought it through, should have considered the consequences. But when I heard that man threatening you, I could not stand by and do nothing. You saved me, Xander. You gave me hope when I had none. Let me do this one thing for you. You have no idea what you have done. Xander's voice was soft now, almost wondering. You have no idea what it means that you would sacrifice your future for mine. Then tell me, Daisy challenged, finally looking up at him. For a moment, Xander just stared at her, and Daisy saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Then he shook his head slowly. I cannot. Why not? Because you deserve better than a broken-down cowboy with a violent past and nothing to offer you. Xander turned away from her, his shoulders tense. You deserve someone good and kind who can give you the life you should have had before your father's choices destroyed it. I do not want someone else, Daisy heard herself say. I want you. The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Daisy felt her face flush with heat, felt shame and fear and hope all warring inside her chest. She had said too much, revealed too much, and now there was no going back. Xander turned slowly to face her again. You do not mean that. I do. Daisy forced herself to hold his gaze. I have been falling in love with you since the day you stood in that general store and told me I was not a bad person. I tried not to, tried to keep my distance, but it was no use. You are kind and strong and good, and when I am with you, I feel like maybe I can be those things too. Daisy, I am not good. Xander's voice was raw. I have done terrible things, hurt people, made choices I can never take back. You only see what I have chosen to show you. Then show me the rest, Daisy challenged. Show me the worst parts of yourself, and let me decide if I still love you. They stared at each other for a long moment, and Daisy could see the war playing out behind Xander's eyes. Then he sighed, a deep, defeated sound, and sank down onto a bench outside the barn. Sit with me. If you want the truth, you should hear all of it. Daisy sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. The sun was warm on her face, and somewhere in the distance she could hear cattle lowing and birds singing. It felt surreal, this moment of quiet before whatever confession was about to come. I told you about the fight in Fort Worth, Xander began. What I did not tell you was that I went looking for that fight. The man I beat, Robert Coleman, he had insulted a woman who worked in the saloon, a woman I knew from previous visits to town. He called her terrible names, treated her like she was less than human, and I could not stand it. So, I hit him, and I kept hitting him long after he stopped fighting back. Daisy listened without interrupting, hearing the shame in his voice. They pulled me off him eventually, but the damage was done. He was badly hurt, might have died if they had not gotten him to a doctor. His father, the rancher I mentioned, wanted me arrested. I left town before they could put together a posse, and I took a horse that technically still had a month of payments left on it. I have been running from that mistake for almost 3 years now. You were defending someone who could not defend themselves, Daisy said quietly. I was being violent and stupid, Xander countered. I let my anger control me, just like my father used to. And the worst part is, there is a piece of me that is not sorry for what I did, that would do it again if faced with the same situation. That is the part of me that scares me, the part that makes me think I do not deserve someone like you. Daisy reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. You want to know what I hear when you tell me that story? I hear about a man who saw injustice and could not turn away from it. Yes, maybe you took it too far. Maybe you should have stopped sooner. But your instinct was to protect someone who needed protecting. That does not make you like your father. That makes you better than him. Xander looked down at their joined hands. You are very good at seeing the best in people. Only in people who deserve it. Daisy squeezed his fingers gently. You have shown me nothing but kindness and patience since the day we met. You could have turned me into the law, could have left me to face the consequences of my choices alone, but you did not. You gave me a chance to be better, and that is more than I had any right to ask for. I gave you a chance because I saw myself in you, Xander admitted. Someone drowning in shame and convinced they did not deserve redemption. I wanted you to know that you did, that you could move beyond your mistakes. And you? Daisy turned to face him fully. Do you believe you deserve redemption? Xander was quiet for a long time, his thumb tracing absent patterns on the back of her hand. I am starting to think I might. Being here, working honest work for honest pay, it feels like I am finally building something real. And having you here, seeing you grow stronger and happier, it makes me want to be the kind of man who deserves your good opinion. You are that man, Daisy said softly. You have always been that man. Xander lifted his free hand and gently cupped her cheek, his callous thumb brushing away a tear she had not realized was falling. You should not cry over me. I will cry over whoever I choose, Daisy said, managing a watery smile. And right now, I choose to cry because I am happy and terrified, and so in love with you that I can hardly breathe. Daisy? Her name was a prayer on his lips. Are you sure? Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? Because if we do this, if we choose each other, there is no going back. I will not be able to let you go. I have never been more certain of anything, Daisy whispered. Xander leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, time to change her mind. But Daisy did not want to pull away. She wanted this moment, wanted him, wanted the future they could build together. When his lips finally met hers, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking something precious. But then Daisy sighed against his mouth and wrapped her arms around his neck, and the gentleness gave way to something deeper, more urgent. Xander pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her hair, while the other wrapped around her waist, and Daisy felt like she was falling and flying all at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xander rested his forehead against hers. I love you. I think I have loved you since that day in the general store, when you looked at me with those scared eyes and trusted me with your darkest secret. I love you too, Daisy said, joy flooding through her chest, so much that it terrifies me. Good. Xander smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. We can be terrified together. They sat there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Daisy felt lighter than she had in years, as if the weight she had been carrying had finally been lifted. She knew there were still debts to pay, both literal and moral. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, she believed she might actually deserve the happiness that was being offered to her. That evening, they told Samuel and Martha about their feelings for each other. The older couple was delighted, Martha crying happy tears and hugging them both, while Samuel clapped Xander on the shoulder and told him he was a lucky man. Over dinner, they discussed the future, talking about how Xander and Daisy could build a life together on the ranch. "There is a small cabin on the eastern edge of the property," Samuel offered. "It needs work, but it could be made comfortable for 2 people. If you are serious about staying, Xander, I would be happy to offer you a partnership arrangement. You work the land and help build up the herd, and in a few years, a portion of the ranch could be yours." Xander looked at Daisy, and she saw the hope in his eyes. "What do you think?" "I think it sounds perfect," Daisy said honestly. "I think it sounds like home." Over the following weeks, they worked together to repair the cabin. Xander fixed the roof and the walls, while Daisy cleaned and made curtains from fabric Martha gave her. They painted the wood stove, built new shelves, and turned the small structure into something warm and welcoming. Every nail Xander hammered felt like a promise of permanence, and every stitch Daisy sewed felt like a declaration of hope. It was during this time that a letter arrived from El Paso. Daisy's hands shook as she opened it, afraid of what Thomas Whitley's sister might say. But the words inside were kind, expressing gratitude for Daisy's honesty and accepting her offer of repayment in installments. The letter also mentioned that Thomas had spoken well of Daisy before his death, saying she was a hard worker with a good heart, who seemed to be running from something. He had hoped, his sister wrote, that Daisy would find whatever peace she was seeking. The letter broke Daisy's heart and healed it at the same time. She cried in Xander's arms that night, finally allowing herself to mourn the man she had wronged and to accept that perhaps he had seen more in her than she had seen in herself. "He knew you were struggling," Xander said, holding her close, "and he still believed you were good. Maybe it is time you started believing it too." "I am trying," Daisy whispered. "Every day I am trying." 3 months after arriving at the Hutchins Ranch, on a cold November morning with frost sparkling on the grass, Xander asked Daisy to marry him. They were standing by the creek that ran through the property, watching the water tumble over smooth stones, when he suddenly dropped to one knee. "I do not have a ring yet," he said, looking up at her with those storm-gray eyes that had become her whole world. "And I know we have not been together long, but I am certain about you, Daisy. I am certain that I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making you happy and helping you see yourself the way I see you. Will you marry me?" Daisy did not hesitate. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch, with Samuel and Martha as witnesses and a traveling preacher officiating. Daisy wore a simple blue dress that Martha had helped her sew, and Xander wore his best shirt with a new vest he had purchased specially for the occasion. The ceremony was short and sweet, but when they exchanged vows, Daisy felt the weight of them settle over her like a blessing. "I promise to love you in the good times and the hard times," Xander said, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to protect you, to respect you, and to remind you every day that you are worthy of love and happiness." "I promise to stand by you always," Daisy said, tears streaming down her face. "I promise to believe in you even when you do not believe in yourself, and to build a life with you that honors the second chances we have both been given." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xander kissed her with such tenderness that Daisy felt her heart might burst. This was real. This was hers. This was the future she had not dared to dream of when she stood in that general store with stolen money burning against her skin. Their wedding night was spent in the cabin they had worked so hard to make a home. Xander carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and they spent hours talking about their dreams for the future. They wanted to expand the herd, maybe buy more land someday, and eventually have children who would grow up knowing they were loved and safe. It felt impossible that just 6 months earlier, Daisy had been running for her life with no hope and no future. As winter settled over the ranch, Daisy and Xander fell into a rhythm of work and love. They took meals with Samuel and Martha in the main house, but spent their evenings in their cabin, reading to each other or planning improvements for the spring. Daisy continued to manage the ranch books, and she carefully set aside a portion of her wages each month to continue repaying her debts. Xander worked tirelessly to improve the ranch, and Samuel began to rely on him more and more for important decisions. It was in late January, almost exactly a year after Daisy had fled Marfa, that a stranger arrived at the ranch. Daisy was in the main house working on the accounts when Martha called out that there was someone at the door. Daisy went to answer it and found herself face to face with a well-dressed woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an appraising expression. "I am looking for Daisy Verne," the woman said. "I was told she might be here." Daisy's stomach dropped. "I am Daisy Verne. Or, I was. I am Daisy Ingram now." The woman's expression softened slightly. "I am Elizabeth Whitley Harrison. I believe you have been sending me money." For a moment, Daisy could not breathe. Thomas Whitley's sister was standing on the porch, and Daisy had no idea if she had come for justice or revenge or something else entirely. I have been repaying what I stole from your brother." "May I come in?" Elizabeth asked. "I have traveled a long way, and I would like to speak with you properly." Daisy led her into the house, her hands shaking. Martha offered tea, which Elizabeth accepted graciously, and then discreetly left them alone. The two women sat across from each other at the kitchen table, and Daisy waited for the axe to fall. "I received your letter and your payments," Elizabeth began, "and I must admit I was not sure what to make of them at first. My brother's death was a shock, and learning that you had stolen from him was an additional blow." "I am so sorry," Daisy said, the words inadequate but heartfelt. "What I did was inexcusable. Your brother was kind to me, and I repaid that kindness with betrayal." "Yes, you did," Elizabeth agreed, but her tone was not unkind. "However, I also read your letter very carefully. You explained your circumstances, your father's debts, and your fear of the men who were pursuing you. And then I spoke to people in Marfa's who knew you, and they all said the same thing. You were quiet and hard-working and seemed desperately afraid of something." Daisy looked down at her hands, unable to meet the other woman's eyes. "I was afraid, but that does not excuse what I did." "No, it does not." Elizabeth paused, sipping her tea thoughtfully. "But it does explain it. And the fact that you have been repaying the money, that you confessed when you could have simply disappeared, tells me that you are not the kind of person who makes a habit of theft." "I am not," Daisy said quietly. "I have never stolen anything before in my life, and I pray I never will again. What I did haunts me every day." "I can see that." Elizabeth set down her teacup and leaned forward. "I did not come here to have you arrested or to demand the money back more quickly. I came because I wanted to meet the woman who was honest enough to confess her crime and brave enough to try to make it right. Those are not qualities I encounter often." Daisy finally looked up, confused. "I do not understand." "My brother wrote to me about you. Did you know that?" Elizabeth said. "In his last letter, which I received a few days after learning of his death, he mentioned that he had hired a young woman as a bookkeeper. He said you seemed troubled but talented, and he hoped that working for him might give you a chance to find your footing. He saw something in you worth nurturing, Daisy, and I believe he would be glad to know that you were trying to make amends." Tears began to slide down Daisy's cheeks. "I wish I could tell him how sorry I am. I wish I could take it all back." "I know." Elizabeth reached across the table and took Daisy's hand. "But you cannot change the past. You can only move forward and try to be the person my brother believed you could be." "I am trying," Daisy whispered. "I married a good man, and we are building a life here. I work hard and send money every month to repay what I took. It will take years, but I will pay back every penny." "Actually," Elizabeth said, "that is part of why I came. My husband and I are quite comfortable financially, as you may know. The money you took, while not insignificant, has not caused us any hardship. I would like to propose an arrangement." Daisy waited, hardly daring to breathe. "Continue to send what you can afford each month, but do not bankrupt yourself trying to repay a debt at the expense of your own future. When you have children, when you need to make repairs or improvements to your home, do not sacrifice those things to send money to a woman who does not need it. I will consider the debt settled when you have repaid half of what you took. The rest can be my gift to you, in my brother's memory, to help you build the life he hoped you would find." "I cannot accept that," Daisy said automatically. "I owe you the full amount." "And I am telling you that I forgive the rest," Elizabeth said firmly. "Not because you do not deserve to repay it, but because I believe my brother would want me to show you the same mercy he tried to show you when he hired you. Let this be your second chance, Daisy. Really and truly. Not weighted down by a debt that will take you a decade to repay, but free to build something new." Daisy was crying openly now, overwhelmed by a forgiveness she had never expected to receive. Thank you so much. I do not deserve this." "Perhaps not," Elizabeth said gently. "But grace is rarely about deserving. It is about choosing to see the potential for good in someone and giving them room to grow into it. They talked for another hour, Elizabeth sharing stories about her brother and Daisy describing her life on the ranch and her marriage to Xander. When Elizabeth finally left, she hugged Daisy tightly and told her to write sometimes, to let her know how her life was progressing. Daisy promised she would, and she meant it. That evening, when Xander returned from working with the cattle, Daisy told him everything that had happened. She expected him to be relieved, perhaps even excited, but instead he was quiet. "What is wrong?" she asked, worried. "Nothing is wrong." Xander pulled her into his arms. "I am just thinking about how far you have come. When I met you, you were convinced you did not deserve forgiveness or happiness. And now, look at you. You faced Thomas Whitley's sister with courage and honesty. And you received grace you did not think possible. I am proud of you, Daisy. So incredibly proud." "I could not have done any of it without you," Daisy said, resting her head against his chest. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Xander corrected. "I was lost too, remember? Running from my past and convinced I would never be more than my worst mistakes. You showed me that I could be better, that I could deserve happiness. We gave each other permission to start over." They stood there in the fading light, holding each other, and Daisy felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The shame that had weighed her down for so long was not entirely gone, but it no longer controlled her. She had been forgiven by the person she wronged, forgiven by the man she loved, and slowly, painfully, she was learning to forgive herself. Spring came to the ranch with an explosion of wildflowers and new calves. Xander and Samuel worked together to expand the herd, and Daisy discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She worried about being a good mother, about passing on the right lessons to a child who would look to her for guidance. "What if I am not enough?" she asked Xander one night as they lay in bed with his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "What if I fail at this the way I failed at so many other things?" "You will not fail," Xander said with certainty. "You will make mistakes, because everyone does, but you will love our child fiercely and teach them to be honest and kind and brave. That is all anyone can ask for." "How are you so sure?" "Because I know you," Xander said simply. "I know your heart, and I know your strength. You faced your worst fear when Elizabeth Whitley came here, and you did not run or hide. You stood tall and took responsibility for your actions. That is the kind of mother I want for my children. That is the kind of woman I am proud to call my wife." Daisy cried then, as she seemed to do so often these days, but these were tears of joy rather than shame. She had not known, a year ago, that this kind of happiness was possible. She had not believed she deserved it, but Xander had shown her that everyone deserved a second chance, and she was determined to make the most of hers. Their daughter was born on a warm September morning, with the windows open and birds singing outside. The labor was long and difficult, but when Martha placed the tiny, squalling baby in Daisy's arms, every moment of pain was forgotten. Xander sat beside the bed, with tears streaming down his face, staring at his daughter with wonder and awe. "She is perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name her?" Daisy asked, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. Xander thought for a moment, then said, "How about Hope? Because that is what you gave me when I had none, and I want our daughter to carry that gift with her always." "Hope Ingram," Daisy said, testing the name. "I love it." Hope grew into a curious, joyful child, with her father's gray eyes and her mother's dark hair. She toddled around the ranch, getting into everything, and both Xander and Daisy doted on her shamelessly. Watching Xander with their daughter, seeing his patience and gentleness, Daisy knew she had married a truly good man. When Hope was 2 years old, Daisy gave birth to a son they named Thomas, after the man whose death had set Daisy on the path to redemption. It felt right to honor him this way, to ensure his name lived on in a family that would not exist without the complicated chain of events that followed his murder. Daisy wrote to Elizabeth to tell her about the baby's name and received a letter back filled with gratitude and emotion. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. Samuel eventually retired and turned the ranch over to Xander and Daisy, though he and Martha continued to live in the main house and help where they could. The herd grew, the land prospered, and the Ingram family became a fixture in the community. Daisy kept the books and managed the household, while Xander worked the land and taught his children to ride and rope and respect the animals in their care. On their 10th anniversary, Xander surprised Daisy with a gift. He led her to the barn, where a beautiful chestnut mare stood in one of the stalls. "She is yours," he said. "I know you learned to ride out of necessity, but I thought maybe it was time you had a horse that was really yours, one you chose for yourself." Daisy was overwhelmed. "She is beautiful, but this must have cost so much." "You are worth it," Xander said simply. "You are worth everything good I can give you." Daisy threw her arms around him, this man who had saved her and loved her and shown her that she deserved happiness. "I love you so much, more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." "I love you too." Xander kissed her deeply. "Thank you for taking a chance on a broken-down cowboy with a violent past." "Thank you for seeing past a desperate thief to the woman I could become," Daisy countered. They stood there in the barn, wrapped in each other's arms, and Daisy marveled at the journey that had brought them here. She thought about that terrified girl standing in the general store in Marfa with stolen money hidden beneath her shawl. She thought about the crushing weight of shame that had nearly destroyed her, and the cowboy who had offered her mercy when she least deserved it. She remembered the moment everything had changed, the day she had been too ashamed to look Xander in the eye after giving away her last hope of repaying her debts. He had lifted her chin gently, forcing her to meet his gaze, and said with absolute conviction, "You are forgiven." Those 3 words had changed everything, had given her permission to forgive herself and to believe in the possibility of a better future. Now, standing in the barn on the ranch they had built together, with their children playing in the yard and a whole life stretching out before them, Daisy understood that forgiveness was not a single moment, but a choice made over and over again. It was choosing to believe that people could change, that mistakes did not define a person forever, and that love could heal even the deepest wounds. She thought about Thomas Whitley sometimes, wondering what he would think if he could see her now. She liked to imagine he would be pleased, that he would be glad his death had inadvertently led to her salvation. She had kept her promise to his sister, repaying half the money over the years and building a life that honored the second chance she had been given. The men in San Antonio had received their payment and disappeared from her life, their debt settled and forgotten. The past that had once threatened to destroy her was now just that, the past, something she had moved beyond and grown from. As the sun set over the New Mexico territory, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Daisy and Xander walked back to their cabin, hand in hand. Hope and Thomas were already asleep, worn out from a day of playing, and the night was peaceful and still. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Daisy asked. "If you had not been in that general store that day, if you had not offered to help me?" "All the time," Xander admitted. "But I also think about how perfect things turned out. We found each other at exactly the right moment, when we both needed saving. That seems like more than coincidence to me." "Like fate," Daisy said softly. "Like grace," Xander corrected. "Like the universe deciding we had both suffered enough and deserved a chance at happiness." They reached their cabin and stood on the porch, looking out at the land they had worked so hard to build. In the distance, Daisy could see the cattle grazing peacefully, their own small herd that represented years of honest work and determination. The cabin behind them was warm and welcoming, filled with the evidence of a life well-lived, books on the shelves, toys scattered across the floor, photographs on the walls documenting their growing family. "I am happy," Daisy said, the words simple but profound. "For the first time in my life, I am truly, completely happy." "So am I," Xander said, pulling her close, "and I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." They went inside together, closing the door on the darkness and the past, stepping into the warmth and light of the future they had built together. It had not been easy, and there had been moments when Daisy thought she might not survive the weight of her shame and guilt. But Xander had been there every step of the way, reminding her that she was more than her worst mistakes, that she deserved forgiveness and love and happiness. In the years that followed, their family continued to grow. They had 2 more children, another son and a daughter, and the ranch expanded to become one of the most prosperous in the region. Daisy never forgot where she had come from, or the mistakes she had made, but she also refused to let those mistakes define her. Instead, she used them as lessons, teaching her children about the importance of honesty, integrity, and taking responsibility for their actions. When Hope was old enough to understand, Daisy told her the story of how she and Xander had met. She did not shy away from the difficult parts, did not hide her shame or her theft. Instead, She was honest about her mistakes and about the grace that had saved her. Hope listened with wide eyes, then hugged her mother tightly. "You were very brave, Mama," she said. "It must have been scary to confess what you had done." "It was terrifying," Daisy admitted, "but it was also necessary. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is the right thing to do." "And Papa helped you," Hope said. "He did. He showed me that I deserved forgiveness even when I did not believe it myself. That is a lesson I want you to carry with you always. Everyone makes mistakes, Hope. What matters is what you do afterward, how you choose to make things right." Hope nodded solemnly, and Daisy knew the lesson had taken root. She was raising children who understood the value of second chances, who would grow up knowing that people were more than their worst moments. Samuel and Martha passed away within months of each other when Daisy was 35, leaving the ranch entirely to Xander and Daisy in their will. It was bittersweet, losing the people who had given them a chance when they desperately needed one. But Daisy was grateful they had lived long enough to see the family flourish. They were buried on a hillside overlooking the ranch, and Daisy made sure their graves were always tended, always decorated with fresh flowers. Elizabeth Whitley Harrison remained in their lives as well, visiting occasionally and exchanging letters regularly. She became an honorary aunt to the Ingram children, bringing gifts and stories, and reminding Daisy that forgiveness was possible even in the darkest circumstances. When Elizabeth died at the age of 70, she left a portion of her estate to Daisy and Xander, along with a letter expressing how proud she was of the life they had built together. As Daisy entered middle age, she sometimes found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this place. She thought about that scared young woman who had made a desperate choice in a moment of fear. She thought about the shame that had nearly consumed her, and the cowboy who had offered her a lifeline when she needed it most. And she thought about the woman she had become strong, confident, loved, and loving in return. One evening, as she and Xander sat on their porch watching the sun set, their grown children off living their own lives and pursuing their own dreams, Daisy turned to her husband. "Do you remember what you said to me that day after I gave away the money to save you from that man Coleman sent?" "Which part?" Xander asked, though Daisy could see in his eyes that he knew exactly what she was talking about. "I was too ashamed to look at you. I thought you would hate me for wasting what little hope I had left. And you lifted my chin and made me look at you, and you said, 'You are forgiven.'" Daisy's eyes filled with tears, even after all these years. "Those words changed everything for me. They gave me permission to believe I could be more than my mistakes." "You were always more than your mistakes," Xander said softly. "I just helped you see it." "We helped each other see it," Daisy corrected. "We saved each other, remember?" "I remember." Xander took her hand, his fingers still strong despite the years of hard work. "And I would do it all again in a heartbeat, every moment, every challenge, every joy, because it all led me to you." They sat together as darkness fell, two people who had found each other at their lowest points and had built something beautiful from the ashes of their mistakes. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and peaceful, a testament to what could be accomplished with hard work, forgiveness, and love. Daisy thought about the girl she had been and the woman she had become, and she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had transformed her. She had learned that shame did not have to be a life sentence, that forgiveness was possible even when it seemed impossible, and that love could heal wounds so deep they seemed unfixable. As she rested her head on Xander's shoulder, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast Texas sky, Daisy knew with absolute certainty that she had found her home. Not just in this place, but in this man, in the family they had built, and in the life they had created together. The past was settled, the debts were paid, and the future stretched out before them, full of possibility. "Thank you," she whispered to Xander, "for everything." "Thank you," he replied, kissing the top of her head, "for choosing to trust me, for loving me, and for building this beautiful life with me." They remained there long into the night, two people who had found redemption in each other's arms, two people who had learned that the past did not have to define the future, and that sometimes the greatest love stories began with a moment of grace offered to someone who desperately needed it. The years continued to pass in a gentle rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Their children married and had children of their own, filling the ranch with new generations of laughter and love. Daisy became a grandmother, then a great-grandmother, and she made sure to tell each new generation the story of how she and Xander had met. She never shied away from the difficult parts, always emphasizing the importance of honesty, forgiveness, and second chances. When Xander was 72 years old, he suffered a fall from his horse that left him bedridden for several weeks. Daisy tended to him with the same fierce devotion he had shown her all those years ago, refusing to let him give in to despair. "You reminded me that I was worth saving," she told him during one particularly difficult night. "Now, let me return the favor." Xander recovered slowly but surely, and though he walked with a limp afterward, he claimed it gave him character. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by family and friends, and when Xander gave a toast, his voice was strong despite his age. 50 years ago, he said, looking at Daisy with eyes that still held the same love they had from the beginning, "I met a woman who was drowning in shame and convinced she did not deserve happiness. I saw past her mistakes to the strong, beautiful person she truly was, and I offered her a chance to start over. What I did not know then was that she was offering me the exact same thing. We saved each other, built a life together, and created something more beautiful than either of us could have imagined alone. Daisy, you are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I would live every moment of our life together again without changing a single thing." Daisy cried happy tears as their family cheered and celebrated. And when Xander pulled her into his arms for a dance, she felt like that young woman again, falling in love with a cowboy who had shown her grace when she needed it most. They lived for many more years, growing old together on the ranch they had built with their own hands. When Xander finally passed away at the age of 86, Daisy was beside him, holding his hand and whispering words of love. His last words to her were, "You made my life worth living. Thank you for choosing me." Daisy grieved deeply for the man who had been her partner, her love, and her salvation. But she also knew that he would want her to keep living, to keep finding joy in the family they had created and the legacy they had built. She remained on the ranch for several more years, tending Xander's grave on the hillside next to Samuel and Martha, and sharing stories of him with anyone who would listen. When Daisy passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 91, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, her last thought was of that day in the general store in Marfa, Texas. She thought about the terrified girl with stolen money and the cowboy who had offered her a lifeline. She thought about forgiveness and grace and the power of second chances. And she smiled, knowing that she had lived a life worthy of the faith Xander had placed in her all those years ago. She was laid to rest beside Xander on the hillside overlooking the ranch, and her headstone bore a simple inscription chosen by her children. She was forgiven, and she forgave in turn. Her love made all the difference. The ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the Ingram family, each new generation learning the story of Daisy and Xander and the love that had founded their legacy. It became a legend of sorts in the region, a reminder that everyone deserved a second chance, that forgiveness was possible even in the darkest circumstances, and that sometimes the greatest love stories began with a single act of grace. And in the quiet moments when the wind whispered through the valley and the sun set over the New Mexico territory, those who knew the story swore they could still feel the presence of Daisy and Xander, two souls who had found each other at exactly the right moment and had built something eternal from the broken pieces of their pasts. Their love had transcended time, becoming a testament to the transformative power of forgiveness, the strength of the human spirit, and the belief that no one was beyond redemption if they had the courage to face their mistakes and the grace to accept help when it was offered. The story of Daisy and Xander Ingram lived on long after they were gone, inspiring countless others to believe in second chances, to offer grace to those who needed it, and to remember that sometimes the greatest gift you could give another person was the simple words, "You are forgiven." Those 3 words had changed 2 lives forever, had created a family dynasty, and had proven that love, when combined with forgiveness and understanding, could overcome any obstacle and heal any wound. In the end, their story was not about the mistakes they made or the shame they carried, but about the choices they made afterward. It was about choosing love over fear, forgiveness over judgment, and hope over despair. It was about 2 broken people who found each other at exactly the right moment and decided to build something beautiful together. And it was about the enduring power of grace, offered freely to someone who desperately needed it, and the way that single act of kindness could ripple outward through generations, changing lives and creating legacies that would last forever. Their love story had begun with a theft and a confession, with shame and fear and desperation. But it had transformed into something far greater, a testament to the belief that everyone deserved a chance to start over, that forgiveness was not just possible, but essential, and that true love meant seeing someone at their worst and choosing to love them anyway. Daisy and Xander had given each other that gift, and in doing so, they had created not just a marriage, but a legacy of grace that would endure long after they were gone.